Hello true believers. Welcome to the spoiler discussion for the second issue of the new Sentry comic. In the spoiler-free review video, I've already talked about the first few pages of the comic, which showcased the Sentress desperately trying to fight back against the staggering might of Cranio, the man with the tree-level mind. That part ends with a badly beaten Sentress lying on the ground and dialogue announcing a new scene. We switch over to the real world, where Jenny, the woman Bob based Sentress on, is working in her diner. In the very next panel, Bob storms into the diner. He is visibly upset and moves at such a high and frantic velocity that bacon and eggs fly up into the air. Bob is looking for Billy because he needs help to find the confluctor, which was stolen in the last issue. Without the confluctor, Bob can't enter the alternate reality in his mind in order to prevent the void from returning to the real world. Billy gives Bob the advice to contact Doctor Strange and Tony Stark and ask them for help. Bob has of course already unsuccessfully tried that, which upsets Billy. Billy blames Bob for trying to contact his big shot friends first. He states that only when everything else fails, only then, does Bob go to him. Bob tells Billy that he is wrong and that he is his oldest friend, but Billy counters with the statement that Reed Richards is Bob's oldest friend. Billy says that he is only the guy who Bob goes to when he has nowhere else to go. He also says that Bob came to him looking for a job. Bob finally caves in and acknowledges it. At first I thought this part was confusing because it would have meant that Doctor Strange and Tony Stark were not willing to give Bob an apartment and a job. But they must have tried doing that, and it was Bob who declined their offers, since he wanted to be independent and lead his own life the way he wants it. Billy gives in, but is also very conscious about the fact that there is not much he personally can do for Bob. Bob tries to come up with a couple of solutions, but all of these fail short. Billy ultimately leaves Bob hanging and goes back to work, stating that Bob didn't want to have a sidekick anymore anyway. In all of this, Billy seems to be very butthurt. I almost viewed it as acting out of character. From the little bit of exposure Billy had in the past, he always seemed like a big fangirl of the Sentry. It was almost naive admiration, since Billy joined the Sentry to fight the Void, even without his powers. But now things have changed for Billy. He used to be a superhero, alongside the Sentry, one of the greatest superheroes the world had ever seen. And then he got his arm ripped off by Sentry's dark side known as the Void. He lost his powers and was ultimately abandoned by the Sentry. So I understand why Billy is so bitter and where he is coming from. Anyway, let's move on. Like Bob moves on as well. Bob tries calling Tony Stark again. Unfortunately for Bob, he fails to reach Tony Stark yet again. And even more unfortunately for him, he gets jumped by the Aberrant Crime Division, a government agency which has been tasked with monitoring the Sentry. On the next page we see Misty Knight, who apparently doesn't just have an arm of steel, but also balls of steel. Misty actually dares to punch a living breathing god, who could punch her to another planet, if he felt like it. Next up we meet Tony Stark, who apparently spent millions of dollars building a bunker to contain Bob, instead of spending a fraction of that money to build a couple of backup confluctor devices for him. Tony wants to keep Bob inside the bunker because he deems him as too dangerous to be outside under regular people. He says that it's only temporary until he builds a new confluctor. Bob however is obviously not a big fan of that idea, since he would rather live half of a life as Bob on the surface instead of not having a life at all inside the bunker. He suggests to turn into the Sentry and find the confluctor before the Void comes back. Now Tony is obviously not a big fan of that idea either, but Bob doesn't care and transforms into the Sentry. Guys, this page right here, this is my Star Wars. Sentry is just standing there, yet looking like a rock star, cool as fuck. Look at him. Look at that handsome ass motherfucker. Look at his junk. They tried hiding Sentry's superior junk in the shadows, but failed to mask it completely. His big little Sentry is still showing. Or is that supposed to be his ass? I can't tell. Anyway, as you would expect it in a dramatic comic, something goes wrong. The Sentry can't feel his Bob persona anymore. In case you're confused about the concept of a Bob and a Sentry persona, I've got your butt. I mean back. Yes, that's what I meant. I will cover that topic in an upcoming video. In the next scene we see Bob who is now in Sentry World, watching the Sentress get beat up by Cranio and ultimately killed. I've already stated in the review video that this Sentress is not real. She is just a thought, but her death is still quite impactful, if you ask me. Cranio then notices Bob, and it looks like he was expecting him. Cranio also states that they can now truly begin. We switch back to the real world, where it's beer o'clock and Jenny is closing her diner. We also see Billy again, who is heading home. He enters his apartment and greets someone. At that point I thought we would see Normie again, which is Watchdog's real name. But instead of meeting Normie, we get punched in the face by one of those jaw-dropping, holy shit cliffhangers. We see Cranio, who is holding and using the confluctor. And that opens up so many questions. Are Billy and Cranio allies? Is Cranio mind controlling Billy into helping him? Is Billy using a vegetative Cranio to get what he wants? Is Cranio even in a vegetative state, or does he only look like Homer Simpson imagining donuts due to the confluctor? Did Bob look that ridiculous as well when he was using the confluctor? Anyway, we also see Billy putting on his best straight face as he states that he becomes the next Sentry tomorrow. What a cliffhanger. Am I right, or am I right? Many readers expected the mystery invader from the first issue to end up being Billy, who already seemed bitter in the first issue. I had seen the previews for the second issue, so I knew it wouldn't be the case. Yet here we are, at the end of the second issue, and it turns out that Billy is a snake in the grass, and that he was indeed the one who stole the confluctor. And to be honest, that saddens me a little bit, because it kinda negates a lot of the story related stuff, which I liked so far. Now, don't get me wrong. I like the story and the direction it's heading. Everything is very exciting and makes sense. I'm just sad because with this, we pretty much lose Billy as a supporting character. He is betraying Bob, even though he knows what a potential return of the Void would mean for Bob and the world. And Billy is doing that for selfish reasons. At the same time, the actual Cranio looks like a loser. He doesn't look like a threat, while Cranio from Sentry World looks like an actual menace. One of the things Sentry needs is variety when it comes to supporting characters, villains and more. But we will see where this goes. Maybe Billy is on his way of somehow becoming a worthy opponent for the Sentry, Kid Miracle Man style. Maybe there will be another swap between characters from Sentry World and the real world. Just like Bob and Sentry swapped places, Cranio from Sentry World could swap places with Cranio from the real world. And if you destroy Sentry World, you end up with a cool and powerful new villain who can do whatever he wants. In either case, I'm very excited to see how the events will unfold. The third issue can't come out soon enough. Until then, stay vigilant.